People who work in morgues or with the dead, what is the creepiest thing you've witnessed? I worked at a funeral home for quite a while. When I first started, about a month in, I was working a holiday weekend. Only people working were the transport guys and me. They came to drop off a body and went right back out. I thought they were still there and needed to ask a question. I walked into the embalming area and this dude was sitting up on the gurney looking right at me when I opened the door, and it literally made me pee a little in fright. Turns out the transport guys picked up the body from an area hospital. He'd passed away while in a slightly reclining position and rigor had set in. They couldn't flatten him out. Still the scariest moment in my career, even if I got a laugh out of it later. People who had been on blood thinner medication before they died can make for an odd scene. Saw a guy that had died looking out of his window, so he was discovered with his head on the windowsill and there was a thick column of jellied blood from his nose to the floor. It was a bit freaky. I watched 2 young children's corpses fry with electricity. We responded to an electrocution. A fault caused electricity to be traveling down the stabilizing cables of the electrical pole. A little kid touched that cable and got shocked, causing his hand to grasp tighter. His little buddy must have seen it and grabbed him. By the time we got there they were both dead, but still electrified. We couldn't safely approach until the electricity department cut the power, so we sat there and watched these 2 little bodies twitch and spark. Was like a horror movie. Had a gig doing overnight transport of dead bodies. Think black suit, white shirt, black tie, unmarked black van, and boss made us wear white gloves. He wanted us to look high-end. Needed to transport a recently deceased middle-aged woman, breast cancer, 250 miles in the dead of night from a hospital morgue to a mortuary near her extended family. It's been a solid 2 hours of total silence when the corpse lets out a low wail. Sounds like I about shit myself as I swerve off the freeway and spray out a rooster tail of gravel and dirt. Even though, intellectually, I know this is just stomach gases escaping the body, I couldn't help but be a little freaked out. I had that happen when putting one in the morgue at a hospital. It was less than 20 minutes since the doctor had pronounced them dead. I freaked out and started unzipping the bag to make sure they weren't alive. I ripped the zipper open on the bag and it was apparent the person was dead, but the eyes were open. I wasn't ready for that at all. Human osteologist here. I work with dry human bones, so they don't do too much. But one of the times I've ever gotten the creeps was when I was handling a crania in the collection and could hear the wisdom teeth shaking around, partially formed but not quite erupted, in the mandible. Wisdom teeth form around 18 years old and erupt generally in late teens or early 20s. I, at the time, was about 20 and my wisdom teeth were just coming through. I realized these remains belong to a girl about my age and that's probably exactly what my skull looks like. It really humanized things for me. Oh boy, my time to shine. I worked as a forensic technician / medical examiner's assistant for roughly 2 years. We were cross-trained in both autopsy and decedent removal from death scenes. I wouldn't particularly say anything was creepy per se, but some things were definitely gross and morbid. Going down to the satellite office, there one HQ office in the state capital and a few smaller satellite offices throughout the state, in the south that was in the woods at 3 a.m. in the middle of a storm that can be categorized as creepy though for sure. However, I'll do my best to synopsize some of the creepiest things I've encountered, in no particular order. The man who used woman's underwear as a toilet paper. This was a strange one. 2 brothers live in a would-be condemned house, both of which are severely intellectually challenged. One, however, more than the other. This was the most repulsive living situation I have ever personally seen. Black mold everywhere, the ceiling caving in, everything covered in crumbling drywall and water damage. Ironically enough, they had no running water. The only clean thing in the house were 2 pallets of baked beans and Coca-Cola. They only think these people ate were beans, and they only drank Coke. By the pallet. Anyway, we get upstairs into the deceased brother's room to find him lodged between the bed and the wall, not uncommon for someone who dies suddenly in their bed in all honesty. However, what we find all over the floors is horrifying. Not only does the bedroom look like a typical hoarder's place, with newspapers and rank junk piled up beyond your knees. No. What we see is woman's underwear spewed across the floor, each covered in fecal matter. Not only this, there were guns everywhere. Not like nice guns either, like old decrepit rusted out guns. The entire house was filled with them, hundreds of unusable guns. The ATF had to come clear the scene and document them all. It was insanity. The autopsy, however, was completely unremarkable. The man whose face was infested with wasps. This one was fairly unremarkable overall, with the exception of the fact his face had been eaten off by a wild animal overnight. This poor soul was riding his bike through a field of cranberry bogs, and suddenly died. By the morning, his face was eaten off by a wild animal. He looked like the Terminator. Some musculature remained, as did one of his eyes, but his lips, cheeks, and soft bits were eaten. Upon my arrival, a small swarm of yellow jackets had taken kindly to the man's face and were eating and laying eggs in it. We had to bug bomb the body bag before opening it to make sure the wasps didn't get into the morgue. Decapitation via high-tension wire. A man jumped from a bridge after tethering a length of high-tension wire to it and his neck as a noose. The force ripped his head clean off. That was the first and only decapitation I actually saw on the job. Woman overdoses around 8 months pregnant. Not much to say here other than the autopsy was insane. The medical examiner was able to remove the amniotic sac without breaking it in situ. So we got to see the baby through the paper-thin sac. Extremely sad and heartbreaking, but contextually interesting. I might post some more later. Alternatively, feel free to peruse through my post history as I've told a few stories in the past as well in a similar thread. Edit. A word. Edit 2. More stories. Man commits via overdose of an experimental drug in dental school. This was one of the most exciting scenes I ever went to do at A, being classified as a top-tier hazmat situation, and B, the emergency response presence at the dental school. In the middle of the major city for the state in which I worked, a dental student decided to commit by overdosing on an experimental drug. When my partner and I arrived on scene, it was chaos. Police, EMS, fire, hazmat, the news, everyone was there. We had to suit up in hazmat suits to go inside the school and reclaim the body, then get brushed down by the fire hazmat team and then clean the body in an airlocked pop-up tent too. The creepy part being that nobody actually knew what drug or cocktail of drugs the guy used, nor what other effects it might have, so we had to treat it as if it was an anthrax infection or something. Crazy. Here is a funny story from my grandma. She used to work in an ER in Puerto Rico. Some guy had passed away, and so the doctor came up to her and asked her to prepare the body to go to the morgue. So, she got some sheets, and started to wrap this guy up. As she crossed his legs, suddenly his penis became fully erect and was straight up. She wasn't sure what to make of it, but it forced her to have to redo the sheets. So as she uncrossed his legs, the penis went down, so she was like, alright, let's get this over with. Then she crossed them again, and lo and behold, the penis went straight back up. Tried one more time and then she got freaked out and went back to the doctor. Obviously he found this hilarious as the guy apparently had a prosthetic in his penis. I initiated compressions on my patient when she unexpectedly coded. About halfway through my first round, the patient pinked up, eyes opened, turned her head and groaned. I stopped, and so did she. Turned gray and unresponsive, so I started compressions again. She woke up again, and I realized that compressions were providing adequate perfusion to her brain, so she'd wake up, but her heart wasn't doing anything. I had to continue compressions and shock my patient, who was awake, groaning, and alert enough to know what was happening. I've coded countless patients without a problem, but this event gave me nightmares for some time. That is insane. I can't imagine how bizarre for both of you. Did she end up making it, if you don't mind my asking? We achieved return of spontaneous circulation, so she came back. Her lungs were injured during the code, so she required intubation. She died 5 hours after intubation, coded with unsuccessful resuscitation. I've had this happen to me too. Crazy stuff. I think the doctors called it compression-induced consciousness. Every time we'd start compressions he'd gain responsiveness, say it hurt and say stop, but every time we paused after he became responsive, we'd lose pulses again. Not necessarily the creepiest thing, but the funeral home I worked for liked to embalm as soon as possible after death. I had embalmed a man that was dead for less than 30 minutes to an hour. He was still warm and rigor had not set in yet. I kinda just held his hand for a minute before I got started. When my wife passed away suddenly, I was sitting with her in the ER, and when I came back in, they had her swaddled, like an infant. I managed to get her hand out, and was holding her hand thinking that as long as I was holding it, it wouldn't get cold. I'm sorry for your loss. There's a different kind of healing that comes with being able to sit with our loved ones after their passing. Even if we don't realize it right away. It's been 10 years and I still draw comfort from that. Attended a suspected fire once where we could smell smoke but couldn't locate the fire. Eventually located it, and when we entered the house there was an old woman slumped over on the floor. Tried to turn her over but couldn't. Turned out that she had been laid on one of the old bar-type heaters, and because the heat was not allowed to escape it had burned a hole through the floorboards and the heater fell through the hole. However, when she was laid on it her body fat started to melt and run into the floorboards, then when the heater fell through she cooled. By the time we got there she was one with the floor. Two of us to get shovels under her to roll her over. It was years before I could eat smoky bacon flavor crisps again. Did she collapse and fall on the heater? Was she murdered and placed on it? I need to know more. Yeah, this question bugged me at the time as well. The rest of the details are that the cause of death was detailed as a heart attack, but they didn't know if she had the heart attack then fell on the fire or fell on the fire then had the heart attack. She was apparently fairly frail and quite often fell. Warning, I have added more detail below in case you want it, but it is not for the squeamish. Do not read on if you don't want to read it. For a bit more info, because I know you want it, when the ambulance turned up they took 3 steps through the front door, took 1 sniff of the smell and said, "Yeah, we're not needed." So the mortuary guys came to take her away. However, because of the circumstances it has to be a doctor who signs of that she is actually dead, officially called pronounces life extinct, so I went with them to the nearest hospital to grab the duty doctor. As he came out he said to me, "It's not a bad one, is it?" I said, "I have seen worse." We unzipped the bag and he put the stethoscope on her and said, "Oh God, she's still hot." In fairness, she was a bit toasty. Because she had kinda been grilled instead of flamed, her skin had contracted and she looked like a mummy and some of the skin had started to split. Worked at a mortuary for a few years. We have methods to keep the jaw shut for viewing, otherwise it would gap open due to the angle of the head and neck. During a viewing the device failed and this gentleman's mouth literally popped open. The lead embalmer was not on site, so I did my best. Ushered the family out of the room and superglued his mouth shut, but he didn't have teeth and supergluing just his lips did not work. It looked as if he was attempting to scream. I had to call in one of our other mortuaries in town and that embalmer used a giant needle and thread to sew his mouth shut from under his chin to his palate. This happened at my great uncle's funeral. We were all lined up ready for the viewing. They took his wife and kids in first to see him privately. They came back very quickly and my aunt said, "His mouth fell open, they have to fix it so it will be a few minutes." I was like 11 years old and was so confused about how they were going to fix it. So my brother helpfully said loudly to me they would use a huge needle and sew it. Nice one, bro. Not the time. One of the decedent's grandsons faked a breakdown over the casket. He stole all her jewelry. Didn't take long to figure out and a large brawl broke out. Jewelry was retrieved. 2 weeks later, grandson turns up needing to be processed and buried. Creepy as hell. How did the grandson die? Found beaten in an alley. Cops suspected drug deal gone bad. A friend told me this story ages ago, and I hope I remember it well enough. When he was 18, he worked for a single plane transport contractor, and one time they had to carry a body. It wasn't autopsied or prepared for funeral yet, that was where they were taking it. So it was wrapped and just sort of laying on the floor. Now, when you're in the air, I'm sure other pilots will tell you, the rise and fall of the airplane will do strange things with gravity, air pressure, and necromancy. In any case, the corpse had enough air in its lungs that the lower pressure outside the body caused the air inside to be expelled, slowly, and through the larynx. Meanwhile, rise and fall of the plane caused the body to sit up and the wrapping to fall away. Sitting up caused it to expel more air from the lungs. So while flying a dead body in the plane, they heard a long low moan, and saw a dead body sit up in the back of the plane. The pilot panicked, left the controls, and ran back and punched the corpse across the face, knocking it back down. He told me about how they figured out what happened, but I was laughing too hard at that point to really pick up the details. I do remember that they had to explain the additional damage to the corpse when they arrived at their destination. So if the dead guy was coming back, dude's first instinct is to punch him back to the afterlife. My wife is a mortician. She's had quite a lot of wacky experiences. This is more funny than creepy, but once she was trying to break up the rigor mortis in a decedent's hip by flexing the entire leg up. Her grip slipped and the leg swung down, the heel cracking her right in the face, resulting in a black eye. She had to explain to people that she's not in an abusive relationship, she just got kicked in the face by a dead guy. I work as a motor vehicle collision analyst. We get called to fatal vehicle collisions and reconstruct what happened or caused the collision, provide analysis and provide courts with expert testimony. I've seen a lot of deceased persons and animals. I've seen almost every wretched way a human can die in a collision. However, there is one that stays with me every fall. Late October I get called out to a fatal single vehicle incident. The driver was traveling through a shallow S-curve but going too fast. She was not able to negotiate the first turn and her vehicle enters into critical velocity. The wheels buckle on the passenger side and she rolls. She was not wearing her seatbelt and through the first roll was partially ejected out the driver's side window. Her skull was crushed between the outside of the door and the road, and continued to flop partially ejected as the vehicle rolled. The skull was split from her left eye to the right rear behind her ear. This caused her brain matter to be strewn about the road and car. Her body was eventually thrown from the vehicle and came to rest on the side of the road. One aspect of the job requires an inspection of the bodies to look for evidence. I approached the body, that is facing upright on her back. The skull was very open and I could clearly see the inside cavity of the skull with no brain. The brain was deposited in chunks on the road and has a distinct smell. This scene didn't bother me at the time, I was more fascinated than anything at the time. A few hours later I get a call from my wife, just asking how the day is going. I told her I was on scene and couldn't talk too long. She then asks if I will be working late tonight or be home on time because tonight we were going to be carving pumpkins with the kids. Years later I still can't carve pumpkins and kids have no idea why. I helped with an autopsy where a woman wasn't found for a few weeks and her cat started chewing on her. I wonder if this does psychological damage to them. I'm sure a dog doesn't feel completely normal about eating your face. I never asked the details, because to be honest, I didn't need to hear them, but my cat arrived at the shelter after her owner passed away. She would get really anxious if I took a nap at unexpected times or on the couch instead of the bed, and would start yelling and pawing at my face to get me to wake up. Once I did, she was always fine, so she wasn't after food or attention or anything. I assumed it was something to do with how her previous owner passed. Before COVID, I worked at a funeral home that wasn't particularly well run. I was a funeral assistant, and one of the embalmers was notoriously difficult to deal with. Her name was AJ. About 4 days before this story, AJ had picked up a deceased man who had died of septicemia and who was to be cremated due to the fact he was already in a bad state on death. So AJ had the brilliant idea to leave this gentleman on the rolling cot for 4 days unrefrigerated, figuring it wouldn't matter since he was being cremated and it was a slow week. Of course, I got the job of moving him to the crematory with AJ. We walked into the embalming room and found that the decedent had bloated and was leaking a gray liquid sludge out of his urinary catheter onto the floor. If pestilence had a smell, it would have been this liquid. It smelled like a warning to the base lizard part of my brain. To describe this liquid as smelling bad is an understatement. The liquid was something you could feel and sense in the air. AJ and I donned our gear, and luckily since she placed him on a cot already, we didn't have to do much in the ways of moving the body. Unluckily, the cot was relatively old and one of the cot wheels had to be manually unlocked using hands, as the foot pedal was too rusted to effectively use. AJ told me to unlock it, and so I carefully bent down and unlocked the wheel. Well, AJ got the bright idea to shake the cot violently as some sort of prank, sending the gray liquid over the edge directly onto the top of my head, dripping down under my eye protection and mask. I closed my lips and eyes so the liquid running over them would stay out of my body, and calmly walked to the employee bathroom in a sort of numb state of shock. The funeral home owner saw my sludgy appearance and sent me home paid for the rest of the day. I would have walked back in there and cold-cocked AJ with every fiber of my being. In hindsight I should have, but by the time I actually got angry about it I was already at home and cleaned up. I think my mind just went nope, and shut off everything but, get this shit off me.